Welcome to Pet Sitter Confessional, an open and honest discussion about life as a pet sitter. Today, we're brought to you by our friends at Time to Pet and Pet Sitters International. A big topic that's actually growing in interest with a lot of pet sitters as they look to see what kind of pets they can care for. And a part of the industry that we have had very little focus on personally has been the avian side of pet care. And so today we are really excited to have Dr. Jennifer Graham, the president of the Association of Avian Veterinarians, on the show to talk about avian care, to talk about how we can help bridge the gap between pet sitters and avian veterinarians, and information that we just need to know and make sure we understand. So, Jennifer, I'm really excited and happy to have you on the show and for you taking your time out of your day to come and speak with us. For those who aren't familiar with you and your work, please tell us a little bit more about yourself.
I can do that. And thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it. So I've been out of veterinary school for a while. I graduated in 1999 from Auburn University. And I did, when I was there, I did some work with the Auburn Raptor Center and got used to working with birds. And I had a background with wildlife, but it was working with the raptors that then sparked my interest in going further with avian medicine. I went to a conference to present. It was actually a case of an owl that lost its eye. And so we had done an ocular prosthetic in an owl, and I was presenting that at a conference when one of the people in the audience had asked me if I was interested in doing an exotic animal internship at the University of Georgia. And I thought, well, that might be interesting. So then that's pretty much how things took off. Is I was at Georgia for a year doing an exotic internship. I was then went to UC Davis for a residency program there. I was up in Seattle at a specialty practice for a few years. Then I went to Boston. I worked at Angel Animal Medical Center for 6 years doing exotics, birds and exotics. And then I taught at Tufts University for a decade. Most recently came back down to Alabama, where I am from, to be close to family. So now I am doing some clinical work and consulting and kind of have the best of all the different things, and have my own birds at home as well.
Oh, what kind of birds do you have?
I have an Amazon parrot, a little budgie, also known as parakeet, and 4 chickens.
Oh, can't forget the chickens, right?
Nope. Those eggs are gold these days.
Right? At least they're earning their keep, right? More than usual.
Absolutely.
Well, so what was it about that time at the Raptor Center that really attracted you and got you interested, given kind of, everything else that was going on?
I feel like, well, part of it was sitting in class all day is pretty rough when you start vet school. And I had gone from handling animals, being around animals all the time, to being stuck in class. And the first couple of years really not doing much with animals. And so I think that just the interest to spend time with animals again, and then birds are just so cool. They're really neat. And I didn't realize I had done a little bit with birds, but never realized I learned so much. I did presentations with the Raptor Center and had my presentation owl. I had a little barn owl that I would talk about. And when we did these educational events for people, I learned so much about birds. And the more that I learned, the more interested I got. And so, I think it kind of went from there.
Kind of just going down the rabbit hole there, and I love how that you mentioned you were finally free from the classroom and had your hands on something, and you're like, this is why I was here and why I wanted to be doing this in the first place.
I do have to say, the first time, I think, because I always wanted to be a vet since I can remember, but I remember one of the first things that sparked my interest was we lived on a little hobby farm. We had a bunch of goats, and our baby goats were dying, and a vet had come out to look at them. I think the first vet didn't really know what was going on. And then the second vet figured out they had parasites, dewormed them. And I just remember thinking, I want to be the vet that saved the baby goat. And so that's, I do remember that as one of my first memories of I want to be a vet.
Oh. Well, it's kind of like being a super sleuth, right? And following absolutely. The trail of clues.
Since they cannot talk, it's absolutely true.
Well, so you're also the president of the Association of Avian Veterinarians. What's a little bit about the history of that association and kind of what's its mission?
So with the Association of Avian Veterinarians, I've been involved with them one way or another since vet school. And I do appreciate how they have a lot of programs in place to support students in vet schools, because there's not a lot of opportunities out there. And a lot of vet schools don't have avian and exotic programs. They don't really have those sorts of educational opportunities. And so my original sort of getting into AAV was from a standpoint of education. But it actually started in 1980. And originally it was, and it's ironic because right now we're actually doing a little bit of investigating the actual origins of the group. And we are giving some lifetime honorary memberships to some of the original founders of the Association of Avian Veterinarians. And it really started out with the American Federation of Aviculture, and then a couple of other veterinary organizations that would have these meetings, but there really wasn't a huge focus on avian medicine. And so a lot of the practitioners that were seeing more birds were getting frustrated with the lack of, a place to centralize and get more education. And ironically, that was back when birds could be imported into the U.S. And there were close to 1 million birds a year that were coming into the country. And since then, that's no longer happening, fortunately. But at the time, there were a huge number of birds being imported. And so there was a need for education. And so really, it just started out with a few people. Started out with their first meeting. I believe they may have had 100 people at one of their first meetings, not a ton of vets. And then it just grew out from there. But if I could, since I'm the president and I want to tell you exactly, I want to read you the mission statement so it can be very, so I don't miss anything. The Association of Avian Veterinarians is a diverse global professional organization dedicated to advancing and promoting avian health, welfare, and conservation through education, advocacy, and science.
I love that. There's so much tied up into that. To know that the organization, the association, really had its foundings in a time where there sounds like there was just a lot of unknowns happening. And you mentioned with 1 million birds being imported, now, the cases that they were seeing, the things that they were coming across. It sounds like it was really just a time where I could sense like there's a lot of frustration of we got to get our hands around this and got coming together to figure out exactly what we're going to do. And that education part's really critical for educating not just, I'm sure it's not just the general public, but also educating the practitioners and then the owners as well.
Absolutely. And it's really, to me, to think back on how that must have felt to be seeing these species that maybe no one else had even seen. No one knew what blood normals were, like what their diet was. All of these things were just the unknown. And so getting that information disseminated and even learning those, that sort of information. And we still are learning.
Yeah, we often take for granted of the ability to walk in and go, my animal, my pet is sick, right? And we always then look at, well, what should normal levels be? And we take for granted of, well, somebody knows what normal is, right? Somebody knows what the range is supposed to be.
Yeah, not necessarily.
Yeah, to know. Okay, now we have to do something about that.
Yeah, and if you look back on some of those studies, it's like they had 10 of a particular species. It's like, oh yeah, so no, kind of limited.
Right. Well, so other than the, I guess you mentioned the stopping the importing, and it sounds like there's just a lot more interest here. What other changes in avian veterinary medicine have you seen over the course of your career and the connections that you have?
That it is an interesting question, and I was thinking back on when I was in my internship. Some of the viral diseases have changed. Like viruses are viruses, the diseases are the same. But what I mean by that is things that used to be more common are less common now. And then things that were not as common then are more common now. And so there's definitely been a shift in the disease. And I think part of that is just with education and with information that has been gained, vaccination programs, things like that. But I would say the diseases in some ways have, changed over time. The reference materials back in the day, there were maybe 2 or 3 books maybe that had some information about birds, but now there's a lot more reference material in terms of textbooks, in terms of online opportunities, a lot more CE events. And then the equipment that we use, back in the day, just very rudimentary types of things. Like when the AAV first started, there weren't even bird incubators. Like that was basically like when incubators first started, because there were egg incubators, but not even that was part of why it organized. My understanding is there was an avian incubator design, like in that pamphlet was one of the ways they marketed to the avian veterinarians to get involved. So many things have changed since those days. And then I remember when I was in my internship and residency program, most of what I did in terms of studying for boards and reviewing articles, it was all printed, paper, print copies in the library. And now there's so much more opportunity with digital, online sorts of things. And so that's been a great change in a lot of ways.
Yeah, moving. I mean, it's again things we take for granted of information and how it can be, transmitted from one person to the next. Feeling like, I have a paper of a research study that just came out, and there's only like 2 copies right now, and it feels like you get something that's kind of smuggled in whenever you can pass it off to somebody else. When you're like, oh wow, I have this information now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What are some common health issues or concerns that you see that specifically that pet sitters, coming and going should be aware of, or at least know are out there?
Absolutely. And I would say it's not even just birds, it's all exotic species. I know a lot of the pet sitters will be seeing other species besides just birds, but by far the biggest thing we see in terms of our pet birds and other exotic species, it's husbandry issues. How they're kept and nutrition is such a huge issue because we see many cases that have underlying malnutrition. And with these pets, birds and other types of prey species, they hide their signs of illness until they're quite sick. And so most of the time they're going to mask disease. And so it's very helpful when people can be aware of some of the subtle changes a bird might show when it's ill. And what I find to be the case is oftentimes these birds come in through emergency and they're on death's door. And the client's perception is it just happened. They just saw this. And the bird will be emaciated, like clearly it's had disease for a while, but it's just that it's with the feathers that cover everything, it's not very obvious. And so even if pet sitters are aware of, for example, good nutrition and knowing if that patient is not necessarily on the best diet, not only can you educate your clients, but then you can also be aware that that's going to be a risk factor for that animal to be sick. We also see a lot of reproductive issues. So keep in mind that in captivity, oftentimes these birds are raised by humans by hand. They may be pulled from the parents early. The birds may be, I'll say, malimprinted. They may think their flock is humans, and in many cases it is, but we can see these birds that become very bonded to their owners, and they can have reproductive issues even without a mate. And so it is quite common that we see birds egg laying, especially as the days get longer in the spring. We see a lot of birds present for egg binding, medical issues around reproductive disease, and there can be behavioral changes, like even if a person walks in the room and the bird starts regurgitating, sometimes that's a sign of affection, which is really strange. But they would normally regurgitate to feed their mate. And so even some of the things like that, knowing what could be behavioral versus illness. But I think the big thing is knowing that they can have subtle signs. And many times owners may not be aware that they are sick. And so when an owner leaves, that can be a stressful time for the bird. And maybe the bird's been hiding something. Sometimes it can, unfortunately, start showing signs of illness as soon as the owner leaves, which is not fun.
Well, right, because it's kind of the stress stacking of it was already, hiding, and all of a sudden we've changed a routine. New people are coming and going, and so it does just kind of elevate it all the more in that time.
Absolutely.
Have you heard of Time to Pet? Susan, the pet gal, has this to say.
Time to Pet has helped us grow exponentially. We believe the platform's features make us by far more professional than other companies who use conventional dashboards. They are the software gurus constantly developing and improving the platform based on user feedback. This decision was a good one.
If you're looking for new pet sitting software, give Time to Pet a try. Listeners of our show will save 50% off your first 3 months by visiting timetopet.com/confessional. Now, you mentioned the good nutrition and diet, and I know a lot of our listeners are thinking of, they're maybe coming from a dog and cat world of, if I walked in and a dog was being fed hot dogs and was drinking, Diet Coke, I might have concerns about this dog and speak up. What are things that would be red flags? We walk into a client and they're walking us through their routine, because it is hard, right? The client is telling us what they feed, and while we have to, in some instances, be deferential to them and go, okay, this is what you do and how you do it. What are some red flags as far as nutrition that we need to be looking out for as they're telling us what their routine is?
Okay. I would say if you go to the average pet store and look on the shelves, and whatever is there is bad. So that's awful. But in the past, we used to, when we didn't know as much about avian nutrition, a lot of the diets were completely seed-based. And now we know that seed-based diets can be deficient in 27 plus vitamins and minerals, and we can see all kinds of issues that happen. Especially think about if a bird goes to lay an egg, in the eggshell itself is so much calcium. If their diet is deficient and they try to make an egg, they don't have enough calcium, they get into some problems. And so even just if you walk in and all you see that bird eating is seed, there can be variation depending on species, but that could be a red flag that there could be some nutritional deficiencies. And so we do recommend for most species that they have at least a portion of the diet, if not the majority of the diet, as a formulated pelleted diet, because then they have nutrition that's essentially built in the entire food item versus birds that are going to be picking and choosing things that taste better to them. It is great if they can have fresh vegetables. We tend to say, be concerned if the bird is eating things like animal proteins, dairy, meats, things like that are red flags. And then it's also good that if pet sitters are aware, things like avocado and chocolate are toxic. Birds are very sensitive to fumes in the environment, so you have to be very careful about cleaning products, things that could cause respiratory irritation. So there are certain things that are going to be different about birds compared to, your typical sort of dog and cat.
Now, the cleaning products is a really good thing to point out, because I know most pet sitters don't provide their own cleaning products. They use what's in the household. But if we come from another person's house where maybe we had to clean up vomit and diarrhea, or we did a big cleaning job on somebody else's home, we do need to be aware of what we're bringing into that client's home, that if they have a bird, right, if it's the next one on our list that we're driving to. So either making sure that we've got plenty of time in between those visits, or possibly a change of clothes, depending on what exactly we were cleaning with.
Absolutely. And even just thinking about going from house to house, if you do have one house you're going to where a bird has been showing a sign of illness, for example, you need to be very careful about not going into the next house where you could introduce disease. So just being even aware of things like that.
Now, you mentioned a couple things about behaviors and things like that. What are some specific red flags for the birds that we need to be on the lookout for? You mentioned, things could change. What are we looking out for, and what do we want to watch on those birds for?
Well, one of the big things, which I think it's probably pretty intuitive, but anytime there's bleeding, that is an emergency. And so birds do not have much blood to lose. And so there can be situations where blood feathers get damaged, potentially nails get caught in something. So if you ever come in and see that a bird is having bleeding, that's no doubt an emergency. But also it's good to be aware that if birds eat items that have red colors, like if they're eating red fruits or if they're eating a toy with red dyes, that can also pass through the droppings. And so sometimes it can look like a bird is having abnormal droppings, and it could be something they've eaten. So that can be a little bit tricky. Signs of respiratory distress. And so with birds, one of the things to look for is open beak breathing. They should not be breathing with their beak open. They should be breathing through their nostrils. But if they were to have some sort of respiratory distress or abnormality, they might be trying to have open beak breathing. Also, if there's a tail bob, if birds are in respiratory distress, their tail tends to move up and down. And part of that is because birds do not have a diaphragm like we do. And so the keel bone, the front of their chest, has to move in and out to allow breathing. And so if there's any sort of compromise with the respiratory tract, they actually have to use different muscles to try to help with breathing. And that can show up as the tail moving up and down. Mm-hmm. And so that's also an important thing for people to realize in terms of the breathing and not having the diaphragm sort of thing. If you do, for some reason, have to, like if the bird escapes, because even if clients tell you their birds are trimmed, they can molt, like just assume every bird is flighted, just assume that. But invariably a bird's going to escape. Like it just every now and then will happen. And so if you do have to get a bird that has escaped out of the cage, just be careful when you're putting it back in the cage. You never want to squeeze across the middle, across that keel bone, because that can restrict their breathing. And so just being aware of some of the basic handling information, if they were to get out, we want to be careful that we're not squeezing them hard, for example.
Yeah, and I know that's something that's come up for us in our business is, some clients will say, "Oh, you don't need to get my bird out of their cage. I just need you to, swap some food in and out because they're not going to be gone that long." Others will want us to bring the bird out and make sure the doors are closed so they don't, fully escape, and also turn off the ceiling fans. That's always really important.
Very important.
Very, very important. But it's a reminder that even if the client has requested we don't bring the bird out for various reasons, that we spend time watching and observing and looking at the bird instead of just focusing on the cleaning and the feeding and things like that, and then moving on to the next thing.
100%. And that's not even just for pet sitters, that's for veterinarians as well. Yeah. Because when birds are prey species, they're going to hide their signs of illness. And if you just immediately go in there and start doing things, you're not going to pick up on the subtle signs. And so when you go into the house, maybe do a few other things, watch the bird, get an idea of what's going on, before you ever even do anything that's going to distract that bird, so you'll pick up on some of those subtle signs. And then I guess I should also add, if a bird is ever fluffed up, if a bird is ever on the bottom of the cage, birds, when they groom, sometimes they fluff up their feathers briefly, but they should be sleek. Those feathers should be flat. If they're sitting there just huddled with the feathers puffed out, that means that they're cold and they're trying to basically have an insulating area, air between the feathers and the body to warm up. And so that's a sign of illness for sure if the bird is not responding very well and just sitting there fluffed. But for sure, bottom of the cage, straining behavior, anything like that would also be an emergency. And then I think it goes without saying, if a bird was having neurologic signs, seizures, I think that people would know that, but I do mention that is also an emergency for them.
So, let's say we do walk in an emergency. What are some best practices for transport of a bird from their home to the hospital? Anything that we need to be aware of, or how to secure the bird appropriately when we're making that move?
Yeah, and I would say this is where doing a little bit of prep work ahead of time, and really your pet sitting clients may not even think about it, but I think a good practice is making sure that you have contact information for the veterinarian, and then having a transport carrier available, because you obviously can't just carry a bird in safely. And so, having at least knowing the location of where a carrier may be, and then covering it with a towel in case it's, cold outside. But I would say that if you do have an emergency, if a bird is hand tame and not having any sort of neurologic episode, it may very well step up, but most birds are not keen on getting into a carrier. So sometimes what I'll have people do is use a little dish towel or something where you can scoop the bird up and put it into the carrier. That versus some bird, well, even my Amazon, he knows what the carrier is. And he typically, as I get closer to the carrier, tries to fly around. And so even getting them into the carrier, it may be helpful to use something like a towel to scoop them up. But some people get nervous about getting bitten, and they have a tendency to want to do things like wear big welding gloves or something. Not a good idea, because you can't really feel what the bird's doing. So much better to just scoop them up and get them in a contained area. But planning ahead of time, making sure that is available, is going to be a key thing to having that be able to happen.
No, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I see pet sitters who, even if they're just taking care of cats and dogs, they don't ask about that aspect, because I think it's one in that moment. It's the furthest thing from our mind of,
absolutely.
Right, nothing. What could possibly happen where I would need to do this? But when it does happen, all of a sudden it's like, well, I guess I'll grab a box or something like that. It's not what we really want to have happen. So those few questions of, and we've had it of, instead of trying to scare the client of like, well, in an emergency, what can we put your bird in? Saying like, well, when you take your bird to the vet, how do you do that? And seeing what their process is can really help you also understand about how I don't know, how behaved the bird is going to be in this process for you too.
Right. And I guess I'm coming from the standpoint of being a veterinarian working in an emergency clinic, seeing these birds come in crisis. So I tend to be the alarmist of them. But I do think, you obviously don't want to scare the client and have them think the bird's going to die, but just to say outward of it, an abundance of caution. These are things that I prefer knowing in advance, just having it even as a take-in form. If you have a form people are filling out, having that as a standard set of questions can be helpful, I think, versus dealing with it in the crisis situation.
Right. Yeah. Making sure that everybody's set up for success, because we want to be bringing the bird in a way that is going to be best for the veterinarian as well, that they're not having to, dig in some weird bag or things like that, right? We want to make sure that process goes real smoothly for everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, I know a thing that comes up a lot with just pet sitting in general is the importance of having good routines, schedules, and consistency. How important is this for birds, their care, and their well-being?
Well, I would say much like us, they are creatures of habit, and they have a lot of time they will have things that I would say, think about it as like a sunrise, sunset. The average bird, in the wild, it's going to go by the sun. So as soon as the sun comes up, they're going to be getting up, they're going to be eating, they're going to be doing their things. There'll be periods of time where they sleep during the day. Oftentimes I'll have people tell me that their bird tells them when they want to go to bed. And so arranging with the client ahead of time and knowing, a lot of times pet sitters may just be coming by once a day. So they may not be coming by at certain times. And so if you're coming in the middle of the day, for example, finding out from that client, if they have lights, are they on a timer? Some birds prefer to be covered at night. And so getting information about how that bird is normally kept. I do have some birds that prefer listening to the radio during the day. I have some birds that they get grouchy if they can't watch their favorite cartoon. So just talking to the client about what their routine is, and sometimes even trying to adjust visit times to help with that situation. But no matter what, it's going to be, a disruption from their normal day-to-day sort of thing just by nature of pet sitting. But I would say, although some veterinarians are able to offer boarding services in the hospital, I always recommend as a first choice that people have a pet sitter come into their home, because it is so much less stress than having that bird transported, be in an unfamiliar environment. So unless there's some sort of underlying medical reason, it is so much better for the bird in terms of just trying to keep things to their usual routine as much as possible.
Yeah, making sure we stay on that. And we've had that too, where some clients will say, well, I usually, do X. I usually feed them twice a day, but you only have to feed them one time. And really taking that moment to say, well, I can do 2 visits, and that way they stay on their routine. And then we can help be an advocate even more so back to the client and say, no, you're not inconveniencing me. We'll go ahead and do the normal routine. We'll come over at night and flip the lights, and at least offering that to them so that they can stay on that routine and that schedule.
Yeah, absolutely. Because even things like fresh foods, a lot of birds will get fresh foods offered, but it's not really ideal to have those sitting out all day and overnight. And so if you are able to come more than once, you can have fresh foods out and then bring them in. And then I don't know if this is a great place to put this in there, but just a couple of common things that I see as issues. One thing to be aware of is that if a bird is eating a seed diet, most of the birds, like the pet citizens, they will hold the seed. So they will open the outer part of the shell and eat the inner seed. And so as that happens, those hulls can stack up, and it's not always obvious when a bird is low on food. So just make sure that people know what to look for if it's the hull of the seed versus the actual seed. Because I have had birds come in through emergency that have not actually had food because the pet sitter was not aware that the seeds were running out, because it looked like seeds were still there, but it was just the whole of the seed. So that is one thing that I would say is pretty key. And then the other thing is to be aware that if a bird has a sipper bottle, those can get clogged because birds are naughty and they like to shove things up to make their food wet. And so every day, as part of the, make sure if they're using some sort of water bottle versus bowl, that there's water coming out. And then when you are cleaning the water bowls, don't just rinse them. What will happen is there's a film that forms on the inside of that bowl. And so if you can even kind of wipe that out as you're replacing the water, because some of the things that would normally cause an issue for a dog or cat could be problematic for a bird if that film builds up in the bowl versus being cleaned out. So.
Yeah, that's another one of always wipe out the bowls. Always, and you have to be sensitive to not, using soaps and detergents in the waters, but wiping the bowls out really goes a long way to helping make sure that they stay healthy, keeping those bacteria levels low. And it's really simple to do. You're already over at the sink, right? Just running your hand, like you can feel it, and that too
exactly.
And that can be something where sometimes clients don't mention those little things because they just know to do it. They're just automatically doing it, and if we're not paying attention, we can gloss over that, and it can go 3, 4, 5 days without being touched.
And for a bird, that is significant for sure.
And now a word from our friends at Pet Sitters International. There's strength in numbers, and connecting with like-minded pet care professionals helps you, your business, and the industry at large. Building your professional pet sitting business doesn't have to be overwhelming. As a PSI member, you'll join thousands of fellow pet sitters working together to set high standards and elevate the professional pet sitting industry, and support one another along the way. Visit petsit.com/join to learn more, and use the promo code Confessional15 at checkout to save $15 off your first year. Again, that's petsit.com/join. Now, what about cleanliness of the cage? Because we've had some clients who have requested us, don't worry about cleaning the cage while I'm away. Any recommendations there, Jennifer, for how often or things that we should be on the lookout for there?
Well, I would say for my birds, I do a kind of a bigger cage cleaning once a week. And so it is true, like I don't always clean the cage every day.
Sure.
What some people do is they'll just have, and I think what makes it easier for pet sitters is if you have newspaper in the bottom of the cage, for example, if you have multiple layers, that way all you have to do is pull a top layer off versus changing out the papers in their entirety. That can be something that's easier to do. Be aware, and this is something maybe even bird owners don't know, you have to be very careful about particulate substrates. So like the corn cob sorts of bedding or walnut type bedding, it's not good because moisture collects and fungal organisms grow, and that can be a real problem. And so if you do see one of your clients using that, I would emphasize to them that it's much safer to do something that's not going to hold moisture. Because if it does sit there and get wet, then birds are very sensitive to fungal infections, and that can be a problem. Especially if you see mold growing in the cage, for example, you do not want to wait on something like that.
Yeah, and that kind of bedding, it can be very appealing. It looks nice, right? It's right there in the pet store. Other people may be using it. You see it in various things. But to go, nope, right? The boring old newspaper, it just works and it's totally fine.
Yep, and then you can see their droppings because the looking at the droppings is such a key to bird health. And if you can't see them, then you're going to miss some of those clues.
Yeah. No, and I loved your tip too about making sure that you're double checking the seeds if they do have access to that, that you're actually looking at the contents of it, because you're too often, if we're busy, if we're not paying attention, it's just a quick glance to go, there's food there, and then we move on. But taking that 1 second to go, but what is that made of? And really going, okay, let me maybe do, I don't know, sometimes we've had to do, let me just do a whole refresh because I can't really tell, or the mixture, there's too many holes here and not enough actual seed. So I'm just going to dump this out and we'll start fresh today and move on, right?
Well, and with the husks, one of the tricks is because they're so light, even if you just kind of agitate the bowl a little, a lot of times you'll see them kind of like, you can actually even just shake them off the top. So, yeah.
Right. Now, I have heard a phrase many times from clients they'll say, I have a one-person bird. Do you have any recommendations for working with birds who aren't either socialized or adjusted to different people coming and going from the home?
Well, one thing I would say is most of the time when clients tell me that, they're wrong. So that's their perception. But keep in mind that a bird will be completely different when the owner's not around. And so whereas, if they are very bonded to an owner, it's a natural behavior to defend a nesting environment, to defend a territory, to defend a mate. But when a bird is in a situation where things have changed, they're going to be much more open to people. Like I've had birds step up for me in a room when an owner has said, oh, they don't like anybody, just because it's a different sort of scenario. So I would say just because you were told that, it may not be true when you are there in the absence of the owner. So I would say the big thing is keep an open mind about that, because not all birds will follow the same sorts of behaviors as they would with the owner there. And then getting used to what that bird's normal behavior is and just reading body language. And so that's a big thing, because birds, if they are, like with my Amazon parrot, when he does not want to be handled, he'll even do some lunging behavior. Sometimes when they're very excited, they have control over their iris, and it's called pinning, but they can dilate and constrict their eye at will, the pupil. It's pretty impressive. So if you see a bird doing that very rapidly, if that pupil is constricting and dilating very rapidly, that means the bird is excited, which could be they're excited to see you or they're about to bite you. So just don't ignore it, because they're trying to tell you something. But just looking at that bird's body language, because they're usually going to be attention starved, their owner's gone, and they're going to be a lot more social with new people if they want attention. So.
Right. Excited to see you or bite you. I've had friendships like that before. This is very
they're much like people. It's true.
No, I know a lot of times, as pet sitters, we don't know what we don't know, and so there's a lot of in this world. Any species specific challenges or things that you think more people need to be aware of, or that you just don't see being addressed?
Well, I would say in situations where you have multiple birds housed together, well, obviously you have to be worried there could be trauma, but I think a lot of times birds like that they're not as involved they may not be as impacted by being left alone, because they have a cage mate. You know what I'm saying? Like they have something that they're interacting with. And I do think that birds that are housed alone may be more sensitive to those sorts of changes. When we do see, because you'll sometimes hear about, oh, the bird picked all its feathers out overnight, which is not exactly a lie. That sometimes can happen. But what I find is that the larger species, like the cockatoos, the grays, they tend to be more prone to be having behavioral related feather damaging behavior that can be associated with an owner leaving. Whereas I don't tend to see that behavior as much in the smaller birds. And so while I hate to generalize, I would say I feel sometimes that the larger parrots seem to be a little bit more sensitive to an owner leaving than some of the, like I feel like, for example, cockatiels they seem to roll with the punches a little bit better.
Any particular reason for that trend that you see between larger versus smaller birds?
I think part of it is how long have they been domesticated? Because if you think about it, some of these birds that, like I said, back in when the AAV first started, there were these birds that were caught out of the wild and brought in, and they had not been domesticated very long at all. And for birds like budgies and cockatiels that have been bred in captivity for longer periods of time, they may be, they may just be better adjusted to things. But then also in terms of natural environments and behaviors, if you think about, like, if you watch a bird in its natural environment, like it's flying and foraging, and there's so many other things it's doing versus just being confined to a cage. And so I think a lot of the problems we see manifest are also because of captivity in these birds and lack of enrichment.
Realizing that we're dealing with very short time frames of captivity and being domesticated, and the number of generations that have happened from the larger versus smaller birds too is kind of what you're touching on there. If they're a lot more used to this, that enrichment side too of, sometimes people put mirrors in there, sometimes people put all sorts of balls or bells. Anything that we need to be aware of that shouldn't be in there if a client has it in a cage?
I'm glad that you brought this topic up. And one thing I would say is, as much as we like birds, enrichment is important. Just realize that a dramatic change of trying to replace toys and things like that, it's going to be a stress if it's, a new environment, a new person, that sort of thing. But things I have seen in terms of birds getting in trouble, if they have a leg band, especially if the leg band is too large, they can get that leg band caught in rope type things, chain type things. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen like how the toys hanging on the C-clamps, that the bird will actually get its beak caught in that. And I've seen birds somehow get it unscrewed, get their beak caught in that, and then come in on emergency with it stuck in there. So be aware of that. And anything that's, we don't recommend any sort of, we don't recommend nests in general, but if there is any sort of fibrous material, thread-like material, they can get that wrapped around their toes. And so watch if a bird has something that they're chewing on, if they're fraying, if it has strands of fabric that could get wrapped around their feet, that could be a problem. So pay attention to things like that.
Again, all the more reason to really take the time to observe. We don't need to be rushing. That's why we're there. Right? The time is to observe the health and condition of the bird, to make sure that everything is in order, and to make sure that we're not missing these things, because I'm sure that it can be easy to miss. We mentioned like the seeds, but really, it just really comes back to that of going, I've got to have eyes, ears. I'm looking hands on the bird. If it is tame enough to do that for me, if it's comfortable, it's not stressed out, to make sure that I'm really catching these things and knowing now is an emergency. I need to move on.
Absolutely. And I really, by no stretch do I want people to be stressed out about birds.
Oh, yeah.
But it is something that, keeping in mind, dogs and cats are much more, I would say it's a lot easier to pick up on things when something's wrong with them. Yeah. And so I feel like that's why I tend to have, the more you know about birds, the better you'll be at picking up subtle things. And so definitely don't be scared, but just realize they're not going to be as obvious as, the dogs or cats maybe that you're taking care of.
Well, where can pet sitters go for more information, resources, or training, to get better at that?
Well, I would say the Association of Avian Veterinarians has a great, I'm a little biased, I guess. But
Nicely done, Jennifer.
They do have some great resources, and they have some pages that are open to clients. So if you go to aav.org, there is an option for finding a vet. So if you are in an emergency and you don't have an avian vet readily available, that could be a way. If your client hasn't told you of one, that's a resource. But also there is a tab for owner resources. There are so many different handouts and videos. Like, for example, if you had to medicate a bird, for example, there's videos on how to medicate a bird, how to set up a hospital cage, various types of things that can be educational. And then with some of the food companies like Lefebvre Vet, Harrison's Bird Diets, they have websites that on their websites, they have educational material for clients, and even information about species-specific types of things, how to know if your bird is sick, that sort of thing. And those, I feel like, are quite reputable sources for people.
I just downloaded the Caring for Ducks PDF off of your website. So we're getting that, sending that over to our team right now.
There's definitely some great summaries of things on there.
Yeah. Well, and it's also just a reminder of this is, as you've mentioned a couple of times now, this is always growing and expanding, and it's not just this general care. Then there's the senior pets, and then there's the medicating pets, and then there's all sorts of different things that we need to be aware of where information is, because we're not going to encounter it all immediately. It's going to be slowly over time and growing with that experience and confidence as we take that on.
And the other thing I would suggest is if there are veterinarians in your area that see birds, let them know you're willing to go into people's homes, because I have people ask me all the time, who can come take care of my bird? Who do you trust that can come into my home? And so even just knowing that people are available for that is hugely helpful, because veterinarians get asked that question quite a bit. So make sure that you look around at the vets in your area and reach out to them and make sure they have your information. That will go a long way, because quite simply, I recommend people to the pet sitters I use because I know them. But if I don't know of pet sitters in the area, it's not something I can recommend. So make sure your vets know you're there too.
Well, so let's talk about that as far as building that relationship of how can, from your perspective, how can pet sitters and avian vets work better and more closely together for the health and better outcomes for the birds?
So I would say Even just letting your veterinarian know that you're available, I think is a big thing. And sometimes it just depends on the schedule because some of them are very busy. But even just having some information that you can leave with the front desk that they can pass along to the vet with a summary of, the services you offer, your experience, your contact information, I think that can be very helpful just so that information is there. And then certainly if you have a pet of your own and you take it in, then you can get to know them that way.
Yeah.
And it is interesting that's how I've gotten to know several people that do offer those services, because I have actually had some of my clients tell me, oh, by the way, I'm available. So that's been one of the best ways that I've been able to meet people to know to even recommend them as well.
I like that you mentioned information about our experience, because I see this a lot of people will go, well, I'll introduce myself to a vet, and they know nothing about us, right? They don't know how long we've been in business. They don't know the kind of animals that we've cared for. They don't know what we've dealt with or the kind of medicating that we've done in the past. And so it would be hard for them to recommend us to somebody for specific things if they're just like, well, I don't know, here's a card I have on my desk, right? That's not really, what we're looking for. So remembering that there's a big conversation there that we need to be having during that initial, contact.
And I would say if any of you are skilled with treatments on birds, giving medications, those sorts of things, that is golden, because I do have some of my patients that are on medications for chronic illness, for example. And if you are comfortable with administering medications, that's another. And like I said, there's a video on that. You can get more information about that. But that sort of thing can be very helpful when we have birds that maybe the owners are. And for me, for example, I don't offer boarding services. I don't have the space in the hospital to offer that. So I'm very much dependent on people going into homes to help out.
Right. Knowing that it's just it's an ongoing conversation, and that just making that first contact, and then if you do have a client with a bird that you have concerns about, or if you want to have more questions, reaching out to the vets in your area to either direct them to a good vet to continue that care for, or just have that back and forth of problems that you're seeing, because we get to be in the home where the bird is in its own environment. And I know before we jumped on the call, you were talking about how you were doing remote consults and being able to be in people's homes, seeing birds and their behaviors. We can really bring a lot of that information of the behaviors and things that we're seeing, as opposed to the bird being brought into a clinic who might not be showing those same signs or symptoms when they're in that environment.
Yeah, and I've actually worked with my clients quite a bit because they'll tell me if they're going out of town and they have someone taking care of their bird. So I will make sure that they give that client the information for the clinic if there's an emergency. And even if it's a bird that has a lot of chronic ongoing issues, I will make sure they have, that they can get in contact with the hospital if there's questions, because I don't want that bird to go without being cared for. And sometimes the veterinarian who has seen that bird over the years has more familiarity with what their normal behaviors may be.
Right. I know you touched on this, Jennifer, but I did want to just ask, if people are listening to this, they're hesitant or nervous about birds. I see this a lot I know some people who just say, birds, they make me nervous. I don't really know a lot about them, or I don't know what's going on here. I'm kind of freaked out by them when they're watching me. What would you say to somebody who's kind of thinking that right now in their head?
I cannot tell you how many veterinarians tell me that.
Okay.
Because I'm always trying to get them to take care of birds on emergency. I hear the same thing all the time. I think really spending time around birds is a big, like if you have friends that have birds, for example, I think that can go a long way. Even if, like, sometimes if I'm in pet stores and I see birds, spending more time around them, just watching their natural behaviors. And in terms of online resources, there are just so many good resources that you can watch, videos of normal behaviors, videos of people interacting with birds. I think those sorts of things can be helpful as well. But either having like visual or direct experience can go a long way to just helping ease comfort, because that's the thing is I think it seems like such a foreign kind of scary thing. And then once you spend more time around them, you realize, oh, hey, they're pretty chill. And I would say if you are scared of birds, it may be good to start with chickens because they're not quite as scary sometimes as citizens. And so they're I would have to say they're generally more low maintenance well, generally, than some of the bigger parrots can do too.
Asterisk.
I was just thinking of when I was a kid and the rooster that attacked me. But anyway,
you know what? I was going to say, Jennifer, I have a rooster I need to introduce you to from my childhood because I had the exact same experience.
Yes, Henry was the one that came out. Yeah, he went after me one time. I remember that well.
Ours was Mr. Imicus, so I definitely.
Better name.
Well, Jennifer, I'm so thankful that you came on the show today and shared with us about a topic that I think a lot more pet sitters need to be knowledgeable in, especially as there's a growing interest in exotics and birds and their care, and people are looking to have that. And I see a lot of people who say, "Well, I can't travel because I don't have anybody who I can trust," or things like that. So I think it's a real need that's needed in the industry. And so for those who want to get in touch with you or learn more about the association, how best can they do that?
So aav.org, and so that's going to be a great resource for people. And I do, my primary consulting is directly to veterinarians. And so if they have a veterinarian that has questions about cases, I actually do consulting through several consulting platforms. And so their veterinarians can certainly reach out to me about case consultations and things like that.
Perfect. Well, I'll have links to the association in the show notes so people can click right to there and see the information and start downloading some of those cool PDFs that I have pulled up over here that I'm ready to dive into. So, Jennifer, this has just been an immense pleasure, and I'm so thankful for your time today. Thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, you're welcome. And I'm just excited because if there are people who are interested in helping take care of birds, it is wonderful to hear. And I hope that I have not deterred you too much from seeking that out.
No, not all. It's a good reminder of the more knowledge and just exposure that we have, the better we can care for these and ask good questions and have good follow-ups and good systems in place so that we have that good quality of care that people are looking for. So it was fantastic.
All right. Thank you so much.
The more you know, the more you're familiar with something, the better you'll be able at picking up on the subtle things. As we gain experience as pet sitters and dog walkers with different breeds, different conditions, different requests, we should never let the first time that we're interacting with that be the first time we've learned about it. Whether it's birds, rabbits, hippos, I don't know. Make sure that by the time you're standing in front of that animal or that condition or that scenario, it's not your first time thinking about it and looking it up. From subtle signs of illness to specific dietary needs, the world is awash with such a wide variety of possibilities. They require observation, informed caregivers, which are us, right? They need that to give peace of mind to the clients and quality care to the pets. So whether it's just checking food, whatever that is, make sure that every detail matters. Take the time to learn, ask questions, and work closely with those avian vets. Build that partnership and that trust that you and they can rely on. Your bird clients and their humans will thank you. We want to thank today's sponsors, Time to Pet and Pet Sitters International, for making this show possible. And we really want to thank you so much for listening. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll be back again soon.